Because I think some people would have just assumed that, no, I mean, a car, you buy a car, it's an appreciating asset. And what are you talking about?
Yeah, I mean, there is a certain class of cars that will appreciate over the years. A good example is you'll see a lot of high net worth individuals that will collect cars as an alternative investment. And generally, those are going to be things like Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Bugattis, these things that have a very, should I say, predictable price curve to them. So they'll come onto the market, they'll generally bottom at year 6, and then they'll start to climb back up again in their value.
Welcome to InFi, the future of finance.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the InFi podcast. I am pleased to announce my conversation with Rex Tracer of DRVN Labo. A little bit of the backstory here. Typically every week, I am a participant, sometimes with Jackson Blau, who's with us here at Infineo, on the Wolf Spaces RWA tokenization platform, where they just have a bunch of people come on and explain, hey, we're tokenizing this, we're tokenizing that. So of course, we at Infineo talk about life insurance. And one of the recurring guests there is Rex, who talks about how they're tokenizing rare cars. And so that always intrigued me. And I thought, you know what? Let me get him on the show. So that's what we're talking about here. Here's some of his official bio. Rex Tracer is the founder and CEO of DRVN Labo, an automotive Web3 product development studio focusing on RWAs, tokenized car culture media, and on-chain community building tools. Rex is a certified motorsport fanatic and blockchain enthusiast with 12 years experience in the industry as a product and brand strategist and UI UX designer. Their app, Driven Vehicles, is now in beta at drivenvehicles.app, and we'll put links to all this stuff, folks, and available directly inside the base app and Farcaster. Okay, so in the conversation here, we'll jump right into it. We're not going to keep you waiting, and Rex will explain what it is they do, and then I circle back and ask him about his background and things like that, and how did you find yourself in this position? So I think it's really interesting. This is one of the, as I say, the most intriguing applications of tokenization that I've come across, and I do these things weekly. So I thought I would share this with the rest of you folks. Here's my conversation with Rex Tracer. Well, Rex, welcome to the InFi podcast.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too. So I would have already explained it a little bit in the pre-recorded intro, but I just hear you talking about what you guys are doing over there at DRVN Labo when we're doing the RWA tokenization X space. And I said, I want to get this guy on the InFi podcast. So why don't we just, the obvious softball question here in the beginning, what is it you guys are up to over there?
Yeah, so I like to say that we're working to bring the global car culture on chain. And the tip of the spear on how we're trying to accomplish this is through RWA, basically fractional ownership of ultra rare investment grade collector cars. We're going to be developing a number of other ways that we interface with car culture. But I think this is one of the more exciting things that we can do at the moment that plays into the big RWA narrative that's gaining in popularity and gives people kind of a chance to call themselves an owner of some of the most rare vehicles on the planet.
Okay. I'm sure just from the names themselves, people can get a sense of what ultra rare and mint and so forth mean. But like the last time I heard those terms was with my baseball card collection when I was a teenager. So can you explain, like operationally, like do those terms have specific meanings?
As far as something being ultra rare or investment grade?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think ultra rare is just sort of a colloquial term I'm using to describe these cars. But investment grade definitely is something that is used in the collector car market. And these are going to be vehicles that have a proven track record of price appreciation. Maybe they've got some sort of historical or cultural relevance to them. Maybe they've been used in a race like, let's say, an F1 car that Lewis Hamilton won a championship in, or in the case of the first car that we're offering in our platform, it's Paul Walker's personal Ferrari 360 Modena. So definitely a one of a kind, like a one of one vehicle.
Right. Okay, so thanks. And that's partly why I was asking you, because I knew some of that backstory there that I wanted to use. It's not just that you're saying like, oh yeah, the, 1957 Chevy, what a great vehicle. Or it's more a particular vehicle that was in this event or something.
Yeah, I mean, we're For the first collection of cars, we're going to be actually tokenizing vehicles and other aspects of car culture in various ways. But for our first collection, we're calling the rare spec cars, or RS spec. They're going to be the ones that are like truly one of a kind or super rare in the sense of something that's been like produced in very limited numbers, something that has a huge enthusiast following and has a proven track record through data of price appreciation over the years.
Okay, great. So do you mind expanding on that? Because I think some people would have just assumed that, no, I mean, you buy a car, it's a depreciating asset. And what are you talking about?
Yeah, I mean, there is a certain class of cars that will appreciate over the years. A good example is you'll see a lot of high net worth individuals that will collect cars as an alternative investment. And generally, those are going to be things like Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Bugattis, these things that have a very, should I say, predictable price curve to them. So they'll come onto the market, they'll generally bottom at year 6, and then they'll start to climb back up again in their value. So those are the ones that a lot of people think of when they think of collector cars when they're building a collection as an investment. But when you talk about more of these upper echelon vehicles that are far more rare than your average Lamborghini, these cars have a whole other level of price appreciation associated with them. So, I'll give you an example. The next car that we're looking at bringing into our collection, it's a Nissan. You wouldn't think like, oh, a Nissan's going to be, worth a lot of money. But the late 90s R34 GTRs are basically like our generation's like dream car. It's what everybody wanted to get in the Gran Turismo games. It's what we all were like, had posters on our walls. And there's a bunch of limited editions of that one called the V-Spec 2 NER. So there are only about 600 of these made, and they're appreciating in value, let's say on average, 15 to 20% per year. And they don't really get affected by other market swings. So, if the rest of the market goes down, these actually hold their value better than most other assets.
So can I ask you, partly for the benefit of the audience, but also I'm just going to admit that this fascinates me, but I don't really know much about this market. Is it like, forget blockchain and so forth, but before that happened, like as of 10 years ago, this kind of a market, is it the kind of thing that if you were an investor, you would buy one of these high-end cars and just occasionally take them out for a spin and then maybe let someone rent it to go to their high school reunion and show up in a really kick-ass Ferrari or something, but you wouldn't want to put too many miles on it? Am I thinking about it right?
Yeah, no, exactly. So you do need to drive these vehicles to maintain them. You can't just store them away in a garage, put a car cover on it and expect it to remain in good condition. Engines need to run in order to be maintained. So yeah, people will regularly put maybe up to 3,000 miles per year on these cars, and that still doesn't negatively affect the value of the car at all. Now, whether they then use it for other revenue streams, some people don't. They might lend it to a museum to be featured there, and they could get paid for showcasing it. They might rent it out to a movie studio to be, like an extra car in a movie, these sorts of things.
Okay, so that makes sense. And so I think this is probably obvious, but one of the functions of the tokenization is that it makes it easier, a smaller investor to get a piece of it where, they couldn't afford to buy the whole thing outright.
Exactly, yeah. So somebody could invest in as little as, $1, $10, whatever, and then they could dollar cost average over time to hit the sort of coveted 1 token mark. So each car is tokenized into just 64 shares. So kind of like it's prestigious to own 1 full Bitcoin for a lot of people, becoming a whole coiner. In this case, we want it to be prestigious to own 1 full share, 1/64th of a car. And then the benefits and perks that they get as a full shareholder are significantly higher. So they can then stake their token or tokens and earn revenue based off of the profits that car is going to make through a variety of means, some of which I kind of already touched on. And then, of course, get exposure to the price appreciation for as long as they hold it.
Okay, great. So if you're allowed to just I don't know if some of this is proprietary, but how the standard version, who makes the decisions about how it's going to be deployed, and then the other people kind of go along for the ride, no pun intended, if they're just like small stakeholders?
Are you saying like the initial deployment?
Meaning like the vehicle itself, like it could be rented to a museum or it could be in a movie. Who's the decision maker if it's owned by 64 separate or 128 separate people?
Yeah. So the way that works is anybody who owns a full share also gets the right to submit proposals. So if they've got a connection, let's say with a movie studio who wants to feature it in a movie, or in our case, we're going to be building those relationships, we can bring that to the table too. And there will be a treasury associated with each vehicle. So there will be a budget that can be used to, let's say, like ship it out to an event to be featured. Maybe somebody like Coinbase wants to sponsor a car in our collection and feature it at their booth at the next big convention in Miami. These are things that can come to us by way of our connections or the community of co-owners connections. Proposals submitted. Anybody with any shares can vote, but only those with a full share can actually submit a proposal.
Okay. And so I guess part of your business model then is, as you get more and more cars under your roof or in your ecosystem, it makes more sense then for in other organizations to strike up relationships with you, because now there's this growing inventory that, it's not just a one-off if some movie maker doesn't want that one vehicle, but if you got now 60 such cars, more and more movies might say, oh yeah, I'll take those two models. And then because you have all those connections, that's why people want to invest via your platform rather than just doing it the conventional way.
Exactly. Yeah. And we'll be offering out-of-the-box methods for monetizing these vehicles. So, for instance, we're working with Web3 racing games. So they can be featured in these games as an in-game asset. So when people go and they buy, they spend $10-15 on a new car for racing, that becomes revenue that goes back to the DAO that controls that car.
Okay.
That's one example.
Okay, great. How do you, again, I'm trying to think of like someone who's hearing this for the first time. Is there, I guess, put it this way, what's your process for selecting which vehicle you're going to tokenize next? And then, how do you do a quality control to, try to assure the people who are buying your tokens that, yeah, this product is what it purports to be and that sort of thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's basically a purchase process that we go through that we fully inspect the cars. A lot of the cars that we're going to be focusing on are JDM or Japanese domestic market cars, because they're some of the highest demand vehicles for collectors right now, but not exclusively JDM. But so we have the car inspected and then appraised. That helps us to attain sort of a fair market value for where the token price starts. My business partner owns a specialty car dealership in Denver. So he has the whole process down. He's been doing for a decade of ensuring that these cars reach a certain level of quality. And then there's also the aspect of us doing our research to ensure that the projected value of the car for the next few years is going to be an upward trend. So we wouldn't want to get something that we feel is going to have a chance of depreciating in value. So those are two of the factors that we look at when bringing car in.
Okay, great. And just you talking about your business partner and what he is, what else he has going on. I guess that leads into, I was at some point going to ask you, might as well do it now. Now that people get a sense of, what it is you're doing, can you just give us some of your origin story? Like how did you find yourself doing this? Like were you from the blockchain space or are you from the car world?
A little bit of both, or maybe a lot of both. Yeah, so my background, I grew up in a very automotive enthusiast family. My family worked for Mercedes-Benz since roughly 1890, so about 4 generations. And my dad raced cars in the 70s and 80s. I started racing when I was 15. And so it's always just been a big passion, not only of me, but my family. And always just kind of lived in that culture. And then on the blockchain side, I have a variety of interests. One of them is actually Austrian economics.
Oh, okay.
So I kind of came from this hard money perspective. I was back in the day, like investing in gold and silver. And then, I was like all about ending the Fed. I still am. And I discovered Bitcoin pretty early on. I think I bought my first Bitcoin in 2013.
Oh, good for you.
It would have been a really good investment if I had any idea where it was going to go, but it definitely set me down this road. But yeah, I was just really enamored with it for a long time. And then it was about 2016, really, that my obsession really kicked in for Web3 and crypto. So about that time is when NFTs started to become popular. And we'd see things like crypto kitties. I think that was roughly when CryptoPunks came out too. And what I immediately saw when I looked at NFTs was not, this thing on a screen. I saw it as having the ability to solve real world problems of, let's say, provenance on chain or, proving authenticity. And I started a project end of 2016, beginning of 2017, where because I'm a watch collector as well. And, there's all these fake Rolexes and high-end watches out there. It's like, oh, well, if we just basically embed an NFT in a watch, you can prove that it came from that manufacturer. That can't be faked. Mm-hmm. So I started a high-end apparel and accessory company, sort of modeled after, oh my gosh, I can't think of the name all of a sudden. They do limited edition apparel. Doesn't matter. And then the top end of
I get all my clothes at Target, so I can't help you.
Yeah, I get all my clothes at conventions. But I started, or I should say, the highest end of the collection was watches. Actually, I'm wearing a prototype watch that I had manufactured, and it honestly never picked up. I think I was a little bit ahead of the game. Nobody really understood the concept. Everybody was looking at minting their CryptoPunks and what have you. So never really took off, but that idea of what I always called phygital goods stuck with me. And then fast forward to 2019 is when I went full-time in Web3. I started as the VP of UI, UX, and brand at a decentralized social network. That company went out of business in 2022. So I was like, well, here's where I want to put down my roots. I don't want to be in any other industry, but how do I combine my passions? And main passion is cars and the automotive culture. So I started to look into what I could do to combine the two. At that time, I was also in the market for a new project car, which I recently actually finished building and featured it on Chain Summit in San Francisco. It's a 97 Nissan 240SX, otherwise known as a Sylvia. I've owned a number of them in the past, and you could pick them up all day, every day for $6,000, $8,000, $10,000. Now finding one that's less than $25,000 is nearly impossible. And so I was like, wow, these things have really appreciated in price since I last owned one. So I started doing more research into the collector car market and saw an opportunity to basically tokenize these vehicles and make this illiquid market liquid. And that kind of led me down this path. And roughly 2-3 years later, here I am with DRVN Labo and doing the thing.
Okay, there's a lot there you covered that I want to unpack. But just before I forget, that most recent thing about, what was the year of that Nissan that you said you were focused on?
The one that I purchased was 97.
Okay. And you said, when you were first looking at them, it was what'd you say, $6,000 or something like that you could get them for? And then now they've got... Do you have a sense, is some of that just due to the fact that over time, fewer of them exist? Because for various, okay. So it's...
Yeah, definitely. There's a combination of factors, particularly with JDM vehicles, because they've become so popular for racing platforms and for drifting. So in the term, they call it the drift tax, or in the term, in the industry, they call it the drift tax. So because these cars are, so much more expensive now than they used to be, that's sort of the term that's been applied to it. And so, I look at these cars as being deflationary assets. So the supply is constantly dwindling. I'll give you an example. You can see a little bit of my car right there.
Right.
In the US, they only made this car for 2 years, 97 and 98. It's the most desirable version of what they call the S14 Sylvia or S chassis. And they only made about 3,500 of them per year. So call it 7,000 in total. The vast majority have been turned into race cars, have, gone through 15 different owners and now are, complete rusty, like death traps. So to find one that's still road going, that's still in good shape, you're going to spend enormous money for something that, you think 97 Nissan, it's not going to be worth that much. But now with all the work that I've put into my car, it's worth probably about $50,000.
Okay, great. Yeah. That's why I was asking, because I was assuming it probably was a combination of those two factors. Just like with baseball cards, there was the one with the guy in the bat had a curse word or something, so they stopped printing it. But then all of a sudden, that particular error card was worth it. If you found one that was in mint condition, that was even more. So okay, very interesting. Do you mind just explaining? Like you said, your family were racers, or at least your dad was, and you were. Can you just talk a little bit more about that? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, since my dad grew up in a Mercedes-Benz family, he had access to all the knowledge and everything around cars and racing. And he got into actually racing Mazda RX-7s in the 70s, which are like little tiny rotary powered cars. I won't get too into it, but they're really unique. They don't use pistons, they use rotors. So that's he started racing the original, JDM cars in the 70s and 80s. And of course, he passed that passion on to me. And so when I turned 15, he knew that it was something I wanted to do. And so we built a little race car for what I started with was called SCCA Solo 1 category racing. So it's basically a low speed, tight road course. You don't usually go above 60 or 70 miles an hour, which is good for a 15-year-old in a full-size car. So we had built a 1990 Jetta GLI. And again, a car you wouldn't expect to be a really good race car, but those things were kind of in that hot hatch category. And I was super competitive just out of the gates. Just my dad taught me everything he knew about racing before I even got behind the wheel. And then we'd go to the track together every weekend. And I was regularly getting in the top 3 of the races each week from the beginning, and was competitive against much faster cars like BMW M3s. So that got me started. And then in around 2001, drifting came to America. So that's, for those that don't know, that's the motorsport where you're basically sliding your car the whole way through the track. And there was a big D1 event. D1 is the highest level professional drifting category in Japan. They came out to Irwindale in Southern California, and I was at the very first professional drift event in the country and just fell in love. I was obsessed. So, of course, started building a drift car and got into that and did that for quite a few years. So it's kind of my story of being behind the wheel.
Okay, well great. Forgive me, I promise, Rex, we will get back to the blockchain stuff, but I just have to, I've never been interviewing this stuff. Yeah, I've never been interviewing someone who's raced cars. Can you give us a sense? Let me try to articulate my question. Like, I can imagine anybody, any competent adult driving a Ferrari is going to beat someone driving a tricycle, right? It doesn't matter, who it is. But as the vehicles get closer together, so can you just give us a sense, in whatever way you want to answer my goofy question? I'm trying to get a sense of how much does human skill in terms of the racer matter versus just the vehicle you have is such a big component of it. You have a way of saying like the best racer alive. Oh yeah, if you put him in this vehicle, he would probably beat you if you were in this vehicle. You understand?
Oh yeah, no, the human factor in it is enormous. I mean, you just look at F1 and you see, the difference between the top level drivers and the bottom level drivers, and there's 20 drivers in F1, and these are the best race car drivers in the world, and the top level basically are on a whole other level from those in the bottom of the grid. But to answer the question another way, it's like anything, you have to have a lot of experience behind the wheel to really understand, how do you know when you're understeering or oversteering? What happens when your brakes glaze? How do you respond in these situations? You're doing everything from like analyzing tire pressure and you're measuring it after the end of each run. Like, okay, what did my tire pressure hit? How is my lap comparatively to the other ones? So you're like, it's the amount of fine tuning and also knowledge of how to drive at the edge. Because once you're driving at the edge, which is what racing is, you go slightly over it, you crash, you spin out, you hit somebody.
Right. Mm.
So yeah, it's a massive amount of human skill that goes into actually being competitive.
And I imagine too, and I'm wondering if you can understand my question. Like if you're watching an NBA game and you can say, oh, you can see the superstars, and wow, look at it, they're clearly better than those other guys, but realizing those other guys are also some of the best basketball players in the world. And it's just like, if you were out there trying to guard the superstars, it'd be ridiculous. You know what I mean? Like you'd be on the wrong side of the court and they'd be laying it up or something.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking it's the same thing too when you're watching a bunch of professional racers going around, not realizing that, oh yeah, the guy who wins was better than, but everybody there was so good, and like just the strategic element involved, and they're all, you know what I mean? Like he's got to be better than they are, and that affects, like he has to know what they're going to do. Whereas if he were with a bunch of regular guys like me driving something, like it's just, you couldn't even compare it.
Yeah. And then there's the physical element of it too. Like again, going back to F1, because that's like my favorite motorsport, is when they're racing there for about 2 hours, their lateral Gs, so the side to side Gs that they're pulling on some of these corners is like 4 Gs. So that's like 4 times their body weight. And to be able to like brace yourself and, have the neck muscles to do that is incredible. And you have things like the like heat. They're basically racing in a sauna and their heart rate's at like 160 BPM for 2 hours. The athleticism is on a whole other level.
So it's not just, we'll just push the gas pedal down as far as it goes. I mean, what else could there be?
Yeah, another fun fact is F1 cars don't have what's called a brake booster. So in a normal car, there's a mechanism that amplifies your pedal input on the brake. In an F1 car, 100% of the force applied to the brakes comes from the driver's leg.
And they do that so you have more control?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, but then you're saying that requires more stamina and whatever to be able to do that accurately for 2 hours or whatever? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, well, thank you for my fix there, just asking, because again, it's rare on this podcast.
I could talk about this stuff forever.
So let me, in the interest of the, since this is a podcast still devoted to blockchain-based finance, let me ask you, I asked this of all the people who come up with, tokenization proposals. And so this is obviously a very friendly question, but posing as devil's advocate, because I don't know if you've seen this, Rex, you're mentioning Austrian economics, so on. There are like Bitcoin maxis who, when I told them, hey, I'm working for a company, we're tokenizing life insurance, they just were besides themselves. Like, no, Bob, the only thing blockchain is good for is Bitcoin. And here's why it works for Bitcoin. It doesn't work for anything else. Why don't you just, use SQL or something? You don't need blockchain for that. Come on. You're just using buzz terms, or you're just, so I don't know if you've encountered that sort of thing. Just people in general reject the idea of tokenization. So one thing I say, well, are you just going to keep saying that until the year 2050 as this becomes more and more of a thing? But besides that, do you have, has anyone ever just, point blank asked you, what does blockchain bring? Like, okay, I like your business model, but you can just do it with, filing cabinets. What do you need blockchain for?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I get that question quite often. I've encountered my fair share of Bitcoin maxis who, again, there's no use for blockchain besides Bitcoin. That's fine. You're not going to convince them otherwise. But the thing I do run into quite often is when I'm, let's say, out at car shows and other, events like this, explaining what I'm doing, most people, the average pushback I get is like, isn't crypto just scams and, and coins? Sorry, I hope you don't mind if I swear.
We might bleep it. Yeah, but that's fine.
Sorry. Isn't crypto just scams and, like ape JPEGs and, Fartcoin, that sort of thing? And, once I explain to them the benefit of what it does, like thinking of it like an on-chain registry in one sense, a lot of people in the car world, they know what a vehicle registry is, the purpose it serves. So that's one way to describe it that a lot of people understand. And then the other would be like maybe comparing it to something like a timeshare, or for some people, I explain it like owning stocks, like having Robinhood, and rather than investing in Tesla, they're investing in a singular vehicle, and it definitely clicks for most people. I'd say my success rate's probably 80%, which is good, at least getting people to let down their guard and be like, oh, that is an interesting idea. I think I'll actually look into that. But yeah, definitely a lot of pushback, mostly from people who think that crypto is good for nothing but scams.
Right. Okay. And I imagine, and you mentioned the word liquidity earlier, that would be part of it too. That, yeah, you could, in principle, do everything you're talking about with cars and 64th share ownership and whatever with pieces of paper or something, or something held by a custodian somewhere that's paper. But it would be more difficult, like if you needed to sell it or if you just wanted to borrow against that. I can't imagine that it being on the blockchain isn't going to be just make it so much easier, and you have such a wider market. And like you say, everybody can quickly verify what this thing is. Whereas if you have a piece of paper or something, then they got to trust, well, who's the custodian of that piece of paper kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, efficiency, verification, the ability to generate yield that programmatically comes back to the members involved.
Okay. Well, I guess as we wrap up here, do you want to just give us your thoughts? Like what's on your guys' horizon over the next year or so in terms of what you plan to bring to the market and make available?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So as I mentioned before, we've got our initial collection that we're building, the RS or rare spec cars. These are going to be more of the really high-end vehicles, probably nothing below like $250,000 in value, that are going to be more of long-term holds that will live inside of our facility. We're also going to be introducing a number of other ways that we're tokenizing vehicles. One is going to be more of like a short-term sort of flip model, which we won't get into at this point, but think of it just like people investing in inventory for a dealership. So that's actually something that a lot of people do. Dealerships will get private investments to build their inventory. And then when those cars sell, there's a predetermined ROI for each vehicle sold back to the investor. So we're looking at doing something like that as well. And then we're also going to be introducing an on-chain registry where an individual can tokenize their car. It won't be in the same way that a liquid market will be born out of it, but rather that they're adding the car to the blockchain to prove the rarity of that specific car, and then to unlock a bunch of other benefits that they can use the blockchain for. But one of the really exciting things that we have on the horizon here short term is we're actually going to be purchasing a property at the Circuit of the Americas, COTA, in Austin. And this is pretty much the most famous track in North America, where they hold F1 every year and world endurance racing and things like this. And that's going to become our headquarters, office, community center, and sort of our museum for all of the cars in the collection. So be able to produce content from there, host events, bring our community members in to, watch the F1 race directly from the track. And that property will be a tokenized asset as well. So people can actually invest not just in cars, but they can buy fractional shares of property and some other car culture collectibles that we have our eyes on.
Okay, well, it sounds really exciting. We'll be watching with great interest. Folks, my guest has been Rex Tracer of DRVN Labo. Rex, thanks so much for taking the time to explain what you're doing, and good luck with everything.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was fun.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see you next time.